Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start today by telling you my experiences with the gift economy. See who just gifted us with coming. Who is that? Is that Valentina? I can't tell. No, I don't know.
It's Inger Met.
Oh, Inger Met, welcome. Long time no see. Thanks for coming. So I live in Austin, Texas, and someone named Genevieve Vaughn was a celebrity here when I arrived. A wonderful philanthropist. I was told she was the heir of the King Ranch, which was the sun never sets on the King Ranch. It goes across so much of Texas, and that she was the heir. And she was married to a diplomat and they lived in Italy, and they worked with the United Nations World Hunger Project, and he was a PhD professor in economics. And when she divorced him, she discovered that the questions that had always been directed to her husband were now directed to her. And that was, what do you do? And what do you care about? And what are you interested in? And she had been working with a World Hunger Project. So she discovered that after she had left her husband economist, she discovered that she had a philosophy of economics, and it was called gift economy. And by the time I met her, she had established quite a lot of wonderful things, including bringing Gloria Steinem together with a Hawaiian princess and others to Austin for a big weekend conference that I attended. By the way, I saw The Glorias by Julie Taymor yesterday. I recommend it, and I'm inspired by it. Meanwhile, she had established a tech education center for women to learn the new thing called video. And she had a place called Alma de Mujer, which was a retreat center owned and operated by indigenous women, and so forth. And she had written a book called For Giving. And the thing about that book was that she gave her example of a gift economy that came to my heart that I never forgot, because I always knew the answers to questions before I heard them. And so I was thinking of all the things she was going to say. I never thought of what she did say. Pause. Gay inspired me to pause. The example she gave of a gift economy is giving words to a child. We don't say, today I'm going to give you the word hat and the word mitten, and tomorrow you're supposed to owe me something back, or you're supposed to pay me for it. We just empower the child by giving the child generously all these words, and then they can have them to do what they want with them, more or less, hopefully. That's the end of that story. And the next thing I want to talk about is two things that happened in Hyde Park, Chicago, where I lived more or less for 31 years on and off, that represent the gift economy. And the people who are going to hear them, I don't think are here. So that's okay. I'm just slowing down. I had decided that the important thing was for my daughter, who was going into 7th grade, to be near her school, because she had been taking a lot of Chicago public transportation to get to school. It took a lot of her time and my worry. So I moved from the north side of Chicago to Hyde Park, where the university is. And I decided that the best thing to do was to get the smallest apartment with the best location, which I did. And therefore I had to get rid of all the furniture that I was housing, big paintings and big Victorian furniture that wouldn't fit, which I did, which was fine. And that was a great gift thing, because I gave it to people and then they thought about me all the time. They still do. I still have your lamp, Helen. So I was living in this very small apartment. It was a 1-bedroom apartment, and there were 2 of us in it, me and Sarah. And it would have been nice to have 2 bedrooms. So I was dating a fellow named Carl. He had worked for Dorothy Day in the Catholic worker movement, and he's married now, and he, I believe, still runs a Catholic worker home, speaking of the gift economy. But he was a carpenter. His father was a senator from Vermont, and he was a master's degree student from the University of Chicago, and he was a carpenter because he didn't want to pay taxes, among other things. And so he just gave me the gift of building a wall so that our dining room, or our living room, turned into a bedroom. We had 2 bedrooms. So that was the next gift. And we were okay in this apartment, and we settled in. And the phone rang after we'd settled in for some months. I had been divorced by then for a number of years, and a lot of the couples had fallen away who were our friends, but not all of them. And one set of couple that I adored were Ruth and Norm. So I still had contact with them, appreciated them. And the phone rang at 5 in the morning. Ruth had a 19-year-old son who had a girlfriend who lived in a very bad neighborhood. And he was taking her home in late at night. And he had a backpack on, and he was with his girlfriend. And he's a very dreaming kind of person. You know, he's not one of these so he's just, you know, he's in his world a lot, and he was in his world with her, and he was shot in Chicago. So Ruth called me at 5 in the morning, and she said, will you come to the hospital with me? Of course. Well, guess who drove? Ruth drove. I mean, that's just the way it was. Ruth drove me to the hospital. And when we got there, we found that the bullet had gone in there and out here. He had to have his teeth rewired, but he didn't lose hearing. He didn't become paralyzed. He went off to college in a few weeks. The family was so shattered by this that they decided they didn't want to live where Ruth had lived all her life, in Chicago, in this neighborhood. So her husband, who said, we're going to live on the lake north of the city in a fancy suburb. And they bought a nice house there. And Ruth said to me, I don't know if I'm going to be able to tolerate that. So I'm not ready to sell the house in Hyde Park. Would you be the caretaker until we're ready to sell it? All you have to do is pay for the utilities. So having no furniture, which I had gotten rid of, every extra lamp and painting, the reason I said yes was because I had lost enough friends to know that it would take a house to keep us connected. As long as I was living in her house, we had to be in dialogue, and we would stay connected. Other people who I love just as much, they just don't remember the priority is to be my friend. More important than all that other busyness. So I was ensuring that this was going to stay that way. And I lived in that house rent-free for 14 years. So that was a gift. And we are still very close. I spoke to Ruth this week. I spoke to Bronson, her son, this week also. So while I was in this house, gradually things started to fill up in the house, you know, furniture from Goodwill, basically. It was also in the right neighborhood to be convenient for my daughter's school. So I had a gorgeous living room, very large, silkscreen walls. I had a sauna. I had an enormous skylight of where my bedroom was. And I made a bed and breakfast out of it. That's another story. Ruth was welcome for me to do that as well. I rented it to graduate students some years. But anyway, at this point, I had a good friend named Les. I met him, and the thing that endeared me to him is he was a wonderful poet, and he would leave his poems on my answering machine, and he happened to read them very beautifully also. So he was a music teacher in a public high school. He had, I think they said there were 30 languages spoken in the high school where he taught. And I used to go and videotape his music classes. So he had a business for the Kodai students, if you know them. That's a very lovely form of music education. He made three-dimensional equipment for the music learning education. And so because of that, he did a lot of silk screening. And he found that over the years, the only silk screening persons he could afford who could reach the criteria of excellence that he demanded, they were all Vietnamese. The other people, they just couldn't do it. They just didn't have the skill. So he had quite a cadre of Vietnamese people doing silk screening for him, working for him. We'll go back a little bit. We're going to get to the gift economy. Les was in the Navy, and therefore he went to college in his 20s. And he made friends with his Shakespeare professor, being older than the other people in the class. It turned out after he graduated, he started having dinner with the Shakespeare professor over the years. And one day he received the information that this man named Robert Terrell had died, and that there was a will, and that Les was the executor of the will. The first thing the will said is, don't contact anyone in my family. And the second thing it said was that all his books, which were in the thousands, were to go to Northwestern University in Evanston. So Les was negotiating all of this and doing all of this, and it was working very well. But there were still hundreds and hundreds of books that Northwestern did not want. And Les didn't want them either. So he called me up and asked, he said, you're in literature. These are all literature books. Do you want them? I said, sure. He said, called me up again. He said, what are the dimensions of your living room? Oh, about 22 feet along that wall and about 16 feet along that other wall. Okay, we'll be there next week. We're going to come at 9 o'clock at night. Okay. Well, it took them longer than they thought. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, Sarah's sleeping upstairs. I'm alone in the house. In marched an army of Vietnamese people carrying bookcases. And the bookcases were installed exactly to fit those walls. And then came boxes, just cartons and cartons and cartons of unmarked books. Well, I called a meeting of Sarah and her partner at the time, David. And Sarah has a degree in statistics, and David is a juggler. Who else could help me with this project? So they just figured out, how do you unpack the books and know where to put them? You don't know how many there are of anything. But we did a gorgeous job. And I loved it. I just loved it. And I was very much of a lady bountiful with these books. People would come and they'd take them off the shelf and I'd give them away, and just wonderful. But then one day Les appeared with a new love, beautiful red-haired, curly red-haired woman. She liked the books. So all of my nobility and all of my fake Buddhism and all of my non-detached, my not being detached, went out the window. And I was just watching her with every book she touched, watching her. But I role played the same Lady Bountiful I had been doing. She took the book she wanted, and that was that. And then I brought a lot of the books, but not compared to what I had. I brought many of them here to Austin, and now we're engaged in giving them away again. There was something. I was going to talk to two people who are not here. So I know they could listen. Stephanie is not here, right? And Bamboo is not here, right? Because I can't really see. So we're going to do another. What else shall we talk about? Let's pause again and see what else we go do. We have another half hour.
Fortunately, since it's being recorded, you can have them listen later.
Not the same.
Yeah.
No, they might want to correct my memory or something, or not, or I might not pay enough homage to the people I was talking about. Even Ruth isn't here, online right now, but she can listen again. So there were so many things I wanted to tell you stories about. I'll tell you about how when I was 55, my half-sister was 65 and her husband was 60. They lived in Massachusetts. And because their health was not very good, they decided to join a retirement community outside of Boston. So the first week of their moving into this new life, I was there with them for us all to make this adjustment. Very, very good food. But it was such a shock. Even everybody had a car. You could leave. You had the car. She's still there. She's 91. She and her husband are still enjoying it. It was a good decision. But it was still a surprise, especially when you walked into the rooms, the little suite that belonged to a couple. They were so anxious to tell you who they had been that it was like a closet. All of their memento and awards and possessions and books were there. It was very sad to me. It just was not comfortable. They just didn't seem to say, oh, we're having this space and we're free. So I was shocked. I was just shocked. And I got home to Chicago after the week. And I said, I have to live my life faster. I have to get more done. Now we call it a bucket list. And I looked at what I had available. And 3 days later, I was meeting Les, the guy who gave me the books. This was before he gave me the books, actually. I was meeting Les in Paris. Well, that was pretty classy. And very exciting to be at the corner of some place or other in Paris, at some hotel, and find he was there. He was a teacher, as I said, and so he had only this little bit of vacation. And it didn't work out quite as well as I thought, because first of all, I think I was hoping that our romance was going to be rekindled because it was Paris, and that wasn't going to happen. But I could handle that. I could adjust to that. Secondly, he thought that since his time is so precious, of course, my time wasn't like that. I had all the time in the world. But he thought that we would arrive at every day we would arrive at a museum at opening, whenever it opened at 9 a.m. We would live this intense rushing around, getting there early life, which I didn't know. But we worked that out. But the thing that really made it very difficult to work out was that he anticipated, this is all about expectations, in case he anticipated that people would understand his French and that he would understand their French. And that was not to be. But they did understand all of my French, and I did understand their French. Not like today, so many years later, I couldn't do that, but at the time, Les couldn't manage with that. That made him furious and frustrated. So anyway, that was our trip, and it was still good. Years later, we're changing gears, but Les is going to come back into the picture again. We got home. We didn't talk to each other for a few months. And then, hello, Nan, no, that's Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Okay, so we got home, and a few months later, we kind of picked up our friendship and went on for years that way. And I had a video business called, sometimes it was called Decisions. Sometimes it was called Video Response Associates, but there were no associates. And I had spent a year of my life making one video about Hiroshima, because years before I had lived in Berkeley, and all my friends, so many of my friends were going to jail, and there were all these free speech movement, capital punishment issues, the university issues, so many things, the justice system. And I was a young mother and I couldn't quite be out there the same way. And I felt like I wasn't the Woman for Peace member that I wanted to be. I didn't contribute to that, knowing so much about what was going on in Vietnam when we were on the coast. I later found that people in Chicago were not informed the way we were in Berkeley. So I had this debt, this idea that I hadn't done what I wanted. And so for 1 year, I made a videotape about Hiroshima. It's called The Unforgettable Fire, and it's about drawings that were made by people who were survivors. And they were very old people by the time this happened, this exhibit. And they said, before I die, I want you to do the prayers that I've been doing every day. And they had drawings of what they've witnessed. Well, the reason I had this business was I wanted my daughter to have a role model. I wanted her to see me running around in the city. I wanted her to see me contributing to important things. I wanted her to see me using my education and all that. But I couldn't really succeed the way I hoped because I just didn't know what I was doing, in the sense that I was not good at camera work. Editing was terrifying because I was in the middle of the night, saving money, working night hours alone, erasing things that I didn't want to erase, and working on this very scary material about the bombing of Hiroshima and its consequences. So I made a deal with a good photographer, Frank Bonilla, to live in the big house, to do the photography for me. And that would be our trade-off. He would do the photography and I would, he would live in the house rent-free. But he had a gun and he also started drinking. So I had the gun and the drinking, and I had broken up with the man I loved a year or two before that. And then I had all this material about Hiroshima, and then I had working with the tech stuff in the middle of the night. And guess what? One day I decided I was enlightened. And I called Sarah and I said, if you have any questions, I can give you all the answers. I know everything now. And that was called being bipolar. I guess that's what it was called at the time. That was called being bipolar. So there was a meeting. I called someone because I was frightened. And she came and took me to her Hyde Park apartment. And Sarah and David came over. And then Ruth and Norm came over, the people who owned the house. And then they got on the phone with my uncle, the doctor, and my father. And everybody said I needed to go admit myself to a mental hospital. But I said, I don't think so. I was working in a mental hospital 1 year, not long before that, and I held all these keys. And I said, I think I should go to the Ritz-Carlton. It'll be cheaper, and you can pay somebody to make sure I don't do any harm to myself. But that was not the way to be. So I entered the hospital, like, what was it called? Michael Reese, blessing everyone, blessing everyone, blessing everyone, blessing the people who were the intake, said goodbye to everybody, and came in this room. And I was then strip searched. And then I had this woman who I thought was going to be kind of like, she was going to be like my mommy or something. And she has lovely, lovely woman. And she interviewed me and she listened. And then she disappeared and I never saw her again. So when she disappeared and I had been strip searched, I was alone in this room. And we have time for me to tell you the hallucination, you can call it. The delusion was the word they liked using, that happened for me at that time. And as a spoiler alert, coming back to Les, after I was on the wrong medications that really were very bad, they took away all kinds of delight in my life. After 9 years of that, Les said, why don't you just work on exercise and nutrition and forget about those medicines? And I know a doctor, I know a psychiatrist who doesn't give anybody medicine. And so he helped me, and I haven't had any psychotropic medicine since 1996. And all I have to do is not sleep certain nights, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Talk too fast sometimes. So here I was in this room, alone, in my blue dresses. I think I was doing a beautiful dress from Morocco in a beautiful dyed, hand-dyed, gorgeous blue, heavy linen with a big gold belt. And I was sitting looking out the window, very gray, church spire in the distance. And the way I remember it, there were kind of slats of Venetian blinds that I was looking through. And my breathing changed. And I saw two huge auditoriums. And on the stage of each one was a beloved teacher of mine. Gwen Osborne was on one stage, Jean Houston was on the other. The auditoriums were packed, and the women on the stage were leading everyone in the auditorium in breathing. And they were breathing me. They were just breathing me, and I felt so good. I just felt so good. And this went on. I can't tell you how long it went on. I would never be able to tell you that. But I noticed that I was in a state of transformation. And I was getting older and older and older. I was also becoming masculine. So I ended up being a very old man. And I ended up having radiation sickness all over my body, wounds all over my body. Because I lived near Dick Gregory. He was a jogger and we used to talk in Chicago. And he used to say, that this is called karma, that we can't just keep hurting people over there in Vietnam and expect not to have any consequences here in Chicago, that whatever we put out there is going to come back to us. And that radiation had come back to me. And so I had a job. Well, this was very important to me. I never had a job that people respected, that earned enough money to cover my expenses, that had any status. And now in this, I had a job. Every day, people arrived and I was placed on a litter, 4 people carrying it. And I was marched through the streets of Chicago. And everyone could see what had happened to me and be frightened. And they would know that it could happen to people because of what America had done. And there was a lot of publicity and narration and so forth. Before that, I had tried to bring attention to the anti-Vietnam thing. I was in a Miss America parade one time where Miss America had blood all over her white gloves and she's standing up in a convertible throwing garbage at, junky things at Miss Saigon and Miss Puerto Rico and whatever. We had done street theater, but this was really working. This was really successful. So when that was over, I was carried to my resting place, which was like where I grew up in Miami Beach. It was an ocean and there was sand. There was a sand castle, drip castle with mud. And I was kind of like part of this drip castle. I was this old man, lots of white hair on my head. And I was sort of stretched out with the sand castle and the dripping. And all around, on top of me and on top of the castle and around me were these darling toddlers. And they were just playing. And I was just hugging them. And the only amazing thing that was better than anything that had ever happened was that I was singing beautifully to them, which had never happened to me in my life, that I was singing beautifully. Years later, I was told that that was my vision quest. And having studied some of that, there's another story that would go with that. Les is now advanced Alzheimer's. But there was another part of Les's story because I knew him pretty well, but it was only when he was losing his memory that he liked to rehearse what he could still remember. And what he could still remember had been secret. I don't think it was legally still secret, but he had not only been in the Navy, he had been with the CIA and he had been a spy, and he had code words and he had stories. And so he was telling fragments of that as the last things that he remembered. So we have a little bit of time for me to go somewhere else. When I was taking that medication, other people said it helped me a lot. I was teaching, I was a landlady, and they said it was easier for them to understand me. That's what they said. But my experience was that whatever the subject was, I only could come up with one thought related to it. Whatever we were going to talk about, I could contribute one thing. And then my mind was like blank. That meant no poetry. It meant no humor. It meant no Helen, really. And nobody seemed to notice or comment on that or say, we miss so much the way you used to be. Only me. I was the only one who missed it and said so. So my family said, you have to listen to the doctor. Remember, this was long ago. And so I would change doctors. They would change medications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. None of them. So, the final doctor said that I probably never was bipolar because maybe the medications would have helped me do what I want to do, like Carrie Fisher or someone like Winston Churchill, Abe Lincoln. But, but the point was, who knows? But I think that the bipolar thing is a spectrum, just like autism can go all the way to something less severe. I think there's just a spectrum. Some people have insomnia. Some people have rapid thinking. Some people spend money and lose all their money and don't know they're doing it. But I don't think it's all one thing or two or three things. So where else shall we go? Oh, I know. The now what thing, part of the purpose of this particular 6-week session has to do with being fully, correct me, Ben, if I don't say it right, but being fully human in a time of challenge. Is that good enough? Is that the subject of this 6-week session? So I have permission from Ben to tell you about being fully human in the eyes of a third grader. Ben went to John Dewey's laboratory school in Chicago, the original school that John Dewey established there, run by the University of Chicago. He was the star of kindergarten. He was the star of first and second grade. His teachers loved him. He loved school. It was a good experience, is what we would call it. Then the first day of third grade, Mrs. Marks's class, paper and pencils were out. And at that time, Jerome Bruner at Harvard was doing a thing about a curriculum for children called What Makes Man Human? Not people, but what makes man human? And so she was very interested in teaching what makes man human. update with the Harvard curriculum. And so they were to write about it. And Ben, charming as he was, used to being charming as he was, he decided to write in verse. So he paid a lot more attention to the rhymes at the end of each line than he did to whatever he was saying. And he proudly came up with his paper after 15 minutes. And she said, I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to read it. Go back and write some more. Think about it some more. When she saw his astonishment and the wounded look on his face, she said, people can spend their whole life answering that question. You can't answer that question in 15 years. So that afternoon, Ben was in tears. He was going to have a terrible year of third grade. And we tried saying this and we tried saying that, and we talked and nothing. It was nothing. He was a whole year with that woman. I said, you know, Ben, there are people called Zen Buddhist monks. This was very new at the time. You know, this was a big deal. Not everybody knew about that at the time in my circles, but they have a thing called a koan, and they have to, their master, their teacher asks them a question that cannot be answered. What is the sound of one hand clapping? That was the famous one at the time. And it's really just a process, Ben. Oh, I was so proud of myself to be able to give him that kind of an answer. And he said, but I'm not a Zen monk, I'm just a little boy. So then I said, here's a $1 bill and I will give it to you if you go to school tomorrow and you tell Mrs. Marks that you were going to give her your answer in 20 years. As I remember, he did. And then there was a parent-teachers conference, and she apologized to me. She said, I'm not the right teacher for Benji. He already knows what I have to teach. The other kids need it, but I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know. And I just reassured her that she was a very good teacher for Benji and that it would be a great year. It was a great year. She was a great teacher. And then came the next year, 4th grade, Mr. Strang. I adored him. He was lively and out there and very comfortable with the kids, very kind to the kids. The first thing I learned about him was that he had spent his first year, not the first thing, he had spent a year of his life in a body cast for some reason, in that stillness. And then he spent the rest of his life in liveliness. And that always impressed me, that he had had that initiation. So things were going beautifully with Mr. Strang, and I went into a parent-teacher conference. And he said, I'm concerned about Benji. He's a good student, but I'm concerned about him. And he said, well, it's about reading. He said, well, we were reading Archie and Mehetabel. Archie and Mehetabel is a story that takes place in the press room of a newspaper in the middle of the night. And the idea is that I think Mehetabel is a cat and Archie is a cockroach. And Archie writes letters by jumping from one of the typewriter keys to the other. And so the book is written by the cockroach jumping from one key to the other to talk to his love, as I remember Mehetabel. And Mr. Strang said he was worried because Benji thought that it had really been written by a cockroach. And I had to reassure Mr. Strang that everybody was fine and that he was a great teacher for Ben and that Ben was going to be fine. Ben, did I get that straight?
Does it matter? Yeah, well, it's funny. I don't remember that story. I mean, I remember Mr. Strang, of course, and Mrs. Marks, and it was backwards. He was 3rd grade, she was 4th. But here's the other thing. What I thought you told me was not to tell her I'll come back in 20 years, which is brilliant and hilarious, but to say the answer is blowing in the wind. Which would be much more kind of irreverent, I think. You know? Whatever it was, I did it, and I did grow to love her as a teacher. The other kids found her brutal. She was very tough.
Well, later on, we had this thing called a mondegreen, which you can look up on Google, MONDE green. That's when you hear the words of the song wrong. And we used to talk about the ants are my friends. They're blowing in the wind. We used to play with that one. So I just love reporting on when my children and grandchildren were babies, little kids. I try to do it without too much pain for them. But I saw Rachel was on a while ago. Is she gone? Here you are. Can I tell try to tell an okay story? Or would you, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Go.
Okay. I had the task of picking Rachel up at nursery school. She was about 3.5, and we had great conversations in the car. There would be things like she'd say that the boys had written on the walls with the wrong marking pens and they had lost their privileges. And so on my answering machine, I left a message, leave a message or else you will lose your privileges. And then another time she's sitting in the back of the car when I'm driving her and she said, someone said a bad word at school today. What was it? Silence. It was poop. I said, well, I don't think that's such a bad word. More silence. And then she said, it was me. So then my last one was that it would be summer. And it was just terrible to try to get her in the car because we all knew how hot it was in the back seat of the car, not to mention being confined with the seat belts and everything. So she was just adorable and charming and not letting me get her into that seat. She could charm me, she could run, she could hide, she could sing, she could tell stories, she could squiggle and wiggle, she could distract me, she could need a Kleenex, everything except to get into that seat. So driving to pick her up, I said, I am just going to get her in fast because it's so bloody hot and we'll get moving. She is not going to reach me with all of that adorableness this time. I'm just going to think of her as a package. She's got to get 2 legs, 2 arms, click the belt. And I did it. And I was ready to start the engine. And she said, Grandma, why are you treating me like this? And my answer to that was, this child has read Martin Buber. So that's the end of my day of storytelling. Ben, would you like to say any more about our sponsor Now What?
Now a word from our sponsor. Shimmer. It's a floor wax and a dessert topping.
What did you say?
It was a Saturday Night Live commercial spoof of a product called Shimmer that's a floor wax and a dessert topping. Well, now it's interesting. Now what I think could be sponsored. I don't know that it sponsors things, but it is just it's a gathering and gift economy space, and an open space where people who want to invite others to come together, as my mother has done here, are invited to do so. And as she mentioned before, our theme, our core intention is to practice the art of being fully human in a time of crisis. And that has to do with connecting with one another as humans, one-to-one, and in small groups and in larger groups. But when we're in larger groups, we often tend to break into smaller ones. Deep listening has been a real theme. When people register, which you don't have to do, many of you are here participating in Now What without even knowing that's what it was or without registering, but you can. And if you do, you're asked to say why it's important to you. to be part of Now What. You're asked, are there any, what gifts are you bringing? What requests do you have? And I've noticed a theme this time around among the 100 odd people so far who've registered. Typically we get up to about 300 by the time it's 6 weeks it lasts is over. That deep listening is both a gift and a request that keeps showing up. So I think we've been meeting that in both ways today.
I'm nervous because I don't want anyone to leave before I do one other thing I planned. I want you to take a look at the quilts and pillows and handbags on my bed, which are made by our cousin, Kathy, and she sells them in order to raise money for the refugees in Texas. So you can see they're just absolutely amazing, and they're much less expensive than they would be otherwise. And all the money, 100% of it goes to the refugees. So I made the whole thing in honor of Kathy. I think you can see it. You can zoom in on them.
Can we put a link to some way how to contact Kathy if people are interested in?
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Yeah, we'll have to find out how to do that.
Maybe you can email it out afterwards, or someone can quickly find Kathy Campbell on Facebook. Or
yeah, she's on Facebook.
Sarah
Kathy with a C. Kathy
anyway,
Boston.
Yeah, so that's another example of what Now What is about, is we make these connections, not just because it's nice to meet people and have this time together, but there's work out in the world that needs doing, and we're looking for ways to support that, to create healing, to create change, particularly transformational change, not just tweaking things around the edges within the current systems. And there's quite a network of networks and intersecting movements, people coming together around this. And so thank you all for being a part of it. One of the things we do in this gift economy space is we do gift money when people wish to. It's not required, but it's invited. And the pool of money that we gather gets distributed in different ways, including to provide support for the people that are creating the container in which Now What can happen. And so if you are inclined to do that, that's most welcome. The website where you can find information about other calls and the contribution link and everything is nowwhat2020.com, which I can put into the chat, and maybe we'll find Kathy Campbell too. I'll go look for that maybe while you wrap up.
Okay. Ooh la, cherished ones, you are my heart's child. Ooh la, cherished ones, happiness will come to you. Ooh la, cherished ones, you are my heart's child. All this world is yours. All this world is yours. Thank you. And by all means, put your own things in the chat. If you want people to come to what you're doing on Zoom, or you want them to know anything, write it in the chat. I'm going to save my chat here. Save chat. Everybody know how to do that?
Yeah, you click the three little dots when you open the chat window up in the bottom right. Yeah, we have, so Now What, this is the second week. We have 4 more weeks to run. Mom's back every Friday.
Not November 6th.
Except November 6th, thank you. We're doing a conversation about the film Fantastic Fungi this Sunday evening. And you can watch that, you can rent it on Amazon or Apple, all those things, and then come gather to talk about it. It's a film that many people I know have been really inspired by. Mushrooms as a direct source of healing and also a metaphor, I think. And many other things going on. There's something like 70 or 80 calls on the calendar already, and there'll be more that keep getting at it. Thanks for being here.
Right. So our host will end the meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.